Hey, welcome back, everyone. This is, of course, week two, and this video is about virtual or online presentations. For us, we, of course, will give our speeches in a recorded setting, and then we will post the link so that we can all watch each other's speeches. Now, I know that we've been in this virtual world, like it or not, for the past almost 2 years now, at least a year and a half. So you have quite a bit, I imagine, experience talking online, whether that is something more formal like a class or if that's just with your friends because you couldn't travel to see them. We've all been doing a lot of online or virtual communication. Now, what I want to point out to you here are some of the things that I'll be looking for. I know even with this experience that we have sort of gained or had to gain, it's been forced on us, there are still some do's and don'ts that we see just broken all the time. And so I want to make sure that we're all on the same page with the expectations of what a good recorded or virtual speech might look like. Now, what we're about to discuss mostly can be used for recorded or live virtual presentations. So it's not like they're two sets of rules. They're actually very similar. And both of those are actually quite similar to traditional live speaking. So, as we go to our course pack, first of all, understand that this isn't necessarily new. We've been using voice and video together since the middle of the 20th century, really. It was just very expensive. And so, hey, we didn't really take it too far. But as technology has progressed, of course, things have been more affordable and we use them frequently, whether that's FaceTime or Skype before we had Google Meet and Zoom, and of course, all the stuff that we use now. Keep in mind that the standard speech rules still apply. So you're going to want to keep in mind very clear choices about your delivery, your word choice. You'll want to be aware of your nonverbals and how you're moving, what your face is doing. Are you gesturing? As with a live speech, you'll want preparation and practice. You want to back up what you're saying with the research. You want to use an effective structure or an outline, depending on your purpose and your goal with the speech, to accomplish that goal. And if you need a visual aid, then you want to make sure that you're using an effective one. And so this is still pretty straightforward, but I do want to highlight some things where it all can go wrong. And so you can read through this. We'll come back to this in just a moment. But I do want to flip over and show you a PowerPoint here. Whoops. We won't go through the whole thing. As a matter of fact, I'll leave it in this view. But the Speech Lab does a workshop on virtual presenting. And one of the things we like to talk about is impression management. And just like with a live speech, an audience is going to develop an opinion of you pretty quick. I mean, almost right away. It's sort of this initial credibility check or first impression, if you want to think of it that way. But when someone comes up, often before they speak, we start to develop our understanding of them, our judgment of them. And that is actually a big source of anxiety. When people think, oh, they're going to judge me, they're right. But that's nothing new. We judge people all the time, every day when we see someone new. It doesn't mean that we're, calling them names in our head or thinking these terrible thoughts. It's just that we judge, we assess, and that doesn't necessarily need to be a negative connotation. So with impression management, though, what you're doing is being in control for the most part of how that opinion of you is formed. Now, you can't get in everyone's mind and make them feel the exact way you want them to, maybe, but you can do some work that will help you manage that impression. So think about small things like, are you standing or sitting? For us, you can be standing or sitting. Again, it may depend on the expectation for a particular course or a particular speaking engagement. It may depend on your physical ability to stand up or not, but understand what's expected in that sense and at least start there. Meet that expectation if there is one. Again, for us, there's not. You can stand if you like, you can sit if you'd like. Do dress appropriately. Our friend in the image here seems to have dressed fairly appropriately on first glance, but when we look back again, we notice that he's not wearing any pants. Oops. Hasn't that happened to us all? No, it hasn't. And this is a person who it looks like that might be MSNBC's Cryon there at the bottom, or one of the maybe CBS News or something like that. But here you've got a person that's going on live television, and I don't know if he thought like I can get away with it, so I'm going to try it, or if it was sort of oh no, I've spilled my coffee on my pants. Okay, no one will notice. Who knows where his mind was, but it clearly wasn't in the right spot. So when I think dress appropriately, of course you should wear pants for your speech. That'd be great. A shirt's good if you've got it. But what I mean here is that we want to not allow our appearance to hurt our credibility. That's a live speech, an in-person speech, and of course a virtual speech as well. We don't want to have anyone just look at us and think, I don't think I'm going to trust them because they don't look like they took this seriously. Excuse me. That does not mean that you need to suit up or, wear sort of your best outfit necessarily for your speech, but it does mean that you won't want to let your appearance hinder you. That also goes along with your face. Now, when I say face, I'm talking here about face work, which is a whole study. It's really kind of fascinating, but the gist of it is that people, especially in an online or virtual setting, will focus on your face. I mean, if you look at my box here in this corner of the screen, let's bring it over so we can sort of line it up. My face is sort of the prominent figure here, and it should be. You should be framed in a way like this, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. But whatever your face is doing, the audience is going to be very sort of hypersensitive to it. In a live setting, when you're in a room like a classroom, you may be standing up in front of the group, but now we see all of you, and we're not always looking at your face. Your face is not always the same size depending on where we are in the room, if it's close or toward the back. But here it's a different ball game. And so what you really want to do is make sure that you're doing face work. In other words, make sure that your facial expressions match what you're saying. Some folks sort of have the RBF, they just sort of, okay, I've got this look. I have it. When I'm concentrating, you should know, man, I look angry. And I'm not, right? I'm just concentrating on something. But for a speech, really be aware of what your face is doing. I've seen so many people get nervous and then laugh nervously when they say something that's actually kind of sad, maybe very sad. Some folks don't get excited when they say something they should get excited about. They just sort of, and then we won $1 million. You want your face to reflect what you're saying. And then when your face does it first, the rest of your body can follow suit. And that is where your voice will come in. And of course, we'll get to that later in the semester. But dress appropriately, don't let that hurt your credibility, and be aware of what your face is doing. Now, another idea here is be aware of the environment that is behind you and around you. So if you look at the image here, we've got a live shot from the BBC talking about the Ukraine crisis. I don't know who this individual is, but look at what's behind him. I mean, it looks like he's in maybe a spare bedroom somewhere. You've got the curtains, or the blinds, sort of cockeyed over to the side and the left. You've got pillows stacked on the floor. You've got the small table there. I think that's technically called a commode. But you've got the small table with the doors that are just left open. The bed seems to be made, but then on the other side of the bed, there's this what looks to be a broken rolling chair, and the chest of drawers there with not every drawer closed with some stuff on top. I mean, it looks like he was robbed, and now he's on TV. And if a person who apparently took it seriously, I mean, he's wearing a suit, didn't think about this, you may not either in some cases. So I need you to do that, and you'll want to do that in this class and in others. But be aware of what's behind you. Avoid, if possible, outdoor recording. That can just leave too many variables open to things that could happen behind you or around you. You just don't know. Instead, try to use a clean board or a wall. You could use a virtual background too, like I am right now. Behind me in reality is my unfinished basement. And that's just where I work because I have a 4-year-old who stays upstairs if you hear noise. But I don't want you to just see my rafters and my guitar wall. I mean, that just doesn't seem to make much sense for a professional setting. So I go with a virtual background. If that's what you need, go ahead and do that. But be aware of what everyone will see when they look sort of this through this window of your life. I tell my staff at the speech lab when they work virtually, try not to work in your bedroom if possible, and if you have to, maybe you do, many do. Don't sit on your bed. I don't know. I feel like our bedrooms are sort of our backstage sort of locations, and inviting a stranger in there via or a whole class of strangers via a recorded speech just doesn't sit well with me. And maybe you're different, but that virtual background can definitely take care of that issue for you. So consider using those. Of course, you probably know by now with Zoom you can add your own. You don't only have to use the ones that they give you. And so as I record, I like to use Zoom and then of course put my own backgrounds in. Also, with the visual background in the visual environment, be aware of lighting. What you'll see in the images there is what happens when the light comes from behind you versus when it comes from in front of you. When the light is behind you, it puts your own shadow over your face and it darkens your face so that we sometimes can't see it very well. This will often depend on the type of camera you have. Some have an iris that will adjust and try to help you with this, but others, most, don't. And what we often find is just what you see there in the image. One of our consultants at the speech lab, who has since graduated, her computer, I think she had a MacBook Air, but anytime that a cloud would pass by outside and sort of darken her room that she was in, her camera would go dark, like it was adjusting and trying to just change, but it just didn't work really well. So be aware of your equipment, but also of your lighting. You want things to be reasonably bright, but you want that head on. So one thing that a lot of folks have done since we've been in the pandemic for so long, including me, is get one of those lights that you can use just for this sort of online presentation. I know a lot of the social media stars have the ring lights, and it makes their eyes look nice, and you see the little lit up circles in their eye. That's really nice. Those things can be $100, 50 to $100 in my experience. What I use is something I got at True Value. It is a work light that you clip on. It's like an aluminum dome with a regular light bulb. You clip it on anywhere you want, plug it in, and now you've got a ring light basically for $9.99. So that's something that you might check out next time you're at Meijer or wherever. But those are real handy to put sort of right in front of you. Mine is here, so you can see the shadow move. But I've turned the lights off in the room behind me so that I don't get too much light. I have a window, but it works fairly well. All right, when you think about framing, we talked about my framing in this image is sort of where you want to be. Your head, your face is the focus. But we want to make sure that we're not doing some things. And that first one is we want to make sure we balance our empty space and that we don't sort of have, a lot of empty space at the top like this. And then it's just sort of this floating head here, or, some people doing it this way. And it just doesn't work real well. So make sure that you're as centered as you can with that empty space beside you and around you equal. You also, don't want to be over here unless you have a guest that's going to come and join you. And sort of throw us all off. Like, why are they over to one side? That it doesn't make much sense. But do play around with some angles. What we see on the screen here, and our friend with the nice wall behind him, has the up the nose view, right? The camera's down, and he's sort of doing this number. That doesn't look good to an audience, especially for a speech, because it's sort of looking down your nose at people. That's demeaning, and while he probably doesn't mean that, it looks that way, and that might be where some audience members' minds go. We also don't want sort of that up top view, right, where people sort of do this deal. You look thinner because you're looking up. I get that, if you don't want the double chins and all that good jazz. But try to find a better option that's more centered. Natural shifts and moving around in the frame are fine. It's okay to do that, to adjust your glasses, to scratch your forehead, to move your clothes. The thing is, you don't want to do any of those movements constantly. In live speeches in a classroom, I've had people that get nervous and they play with their hair, they crack their knuckles, or they pull on their clothes. It's not a problem until it gets distracting, because now all I can think about is, why do they keep doing that, whatever it is. So just be aware of how hypersensitive your audience is about what you're doing in that frame, and don't worry about being perfectly still. In fact, you shouldn't be. That movement a little bit keeps people's eyes from just settling in one spot. And when they do that, they often close because we just sort of stare into the distance. But the big takeaway here is to find that happy Goldilocks zone. Now, you don't want to be too close. I mean, it's Leo, so if you had to have a face up close, maybe that's a good one. But you want something like that, where you are nice and square to the middle. The other thing I would mention with this would be your hardware. So just know where your camera is. So like right now, I moved my box from over here to over here. And that's because the camera, I'm using a MacBook Pro, my camera is right in the center of my screen, the top of my screen. And so when I move it here, I can look at my image and make eye contact with you. But if I was over here and I was looking at my image, which we would normally want to do, I'm not making eye contact anymore. So that's why I moved it over. Be aware of where your microphone is. If it's built into your computer, you don't want to lay a piece of paper over it or your speaking notes. And then as you move that, we can hear it. Same thing with your hands, right? We're touching it. Play around with the software if you're not familiar. I imagine you are by now. But a big takeaway here, get familiar with what you're using so that you can appear credible when you are recording. If something goes wrong and you need to fix something quickly or on the fly, you want to be able to do that so that you don't struggle in front of an audience. Now, you can always stop the recording and start over, but that's more work. And so it's probably better if you just can fix it and keep moving. Not always going to work, but often it will. Now, going back to our list here, let's see what we've got. We talked about your surroundings. I will say, don't embarrass yourself with, some dirty clothes or something in the background. We talked about lighting. Use daylight bulbs if possible. That's an option. I know most people, if you live in an apartment or on campus, you're not buying your own light bulbs, chances are. But, that's not a bad investment for less than $10. Your framing, we talked about the Goldilocks zone and avoiding some, strange angles. With nonverbal considerations, remember again, eye contact is camera contact. So you in a live classroom speech, eye contact is a huge part of your grade, and it still is here. But you're going to now make eye contact with the camera to make eye contact with your audience. That's just what you're going to have to imagine, because that's the virtual equivalent. Do be aware of any shifty eyes that you might have if you're reading. A lot of folks will want to throw up their notes on the screen and then read their speech, and you see this the whole time. Remember, again, we're hyper focused on your face, and so if that's what you're doing, we'll notice it. The frame should be the focus. We want to make sure that you are squared up here. Gesture naturally. Remember to do that. Most of us do it in normal conversation. And when we move to a speech setting, in a live setting, often we'll be able to see all of you. So if you make gestures that are maybe what we would call outside the box and maybe lower, literally outside of this box, you see my hands disappearing. I'm gesturing right now, and all you can see is little flashes of my hands sort of popping up at the bottom. If we can't see your gestures, it's like you didn't gesture. So make sure that your camera is catching those and that your hands are up so we can see them. That doesn't mean that you need to sort of be up here and do all this. It just means that we need to be aware of our space and what's visible. If you find that you're not visible enough, scoot back a little bit. And now you can gesture much more naturally here at this, a lower level as opposed to here. But I still want to make sure that it's visible on the camera. So, just like with a live speech, be purposeful with your gestures. Don't just make gestures to gesture. If something is small, show us small. If something's large, show us large. If it's sort of progressing over time, show us that. And we'll get more into this later in the semester. But be aware that they are gestures are so important and vital to all speeches, not just those that happen live. The last thing I'll say is about your voice, what that voice do. Uh, in all speaking settings, low volume and monotone voices are not a great thing. They make you hard to understand. It's difficult to follow you and to stay sort of in tune with you because of that monotone delivery. However, when you are doing that virtually, it's just amplified even more. It makes everything a little more difficult to understand, to follow. And so when you're not really, you know, taking the lead with that, it can really make things tough. So try to be generally consistent with your volume. You don't have to yell at us, but please don't whisper. Also, please don't drop the volume of your sentence at the end. A lot of folks will say things like, and this is why we had to go. What was that at the end? All right, so make sure that we can hear everything. And do that also with your rate. And by the way, generally consistent does not mean an absence of variation. When you're excited, your pitch goes everywhere. You know, it goes up. When you're sad, your pitch goes down. Your rate goes up when you're excited. When you're sad, it goes down. Let these things naturally happen in a speech just like they would in a conversation. And if you can mimic that reality as much as you can, you should be all right. Okay, go back, check over that as you make your own videos. You might take your first week's intro speech and then sort of check it against what we've talked about here. Again, no grade infraction for the first speech, but just see sort of if there were standards that we were applying to that intro speech, how would you have done with what we've discussed? As always, let me know if you have questions. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.